The Discourse on the Arts and Sciences by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Discourse, which was awarded the prize by the Academy of Dijon in the year 1750, on this question which the Academy itself proposed: has the restoration of the sciences and the arts contributed to refining moral practices? Barbarus hic ego sum, quia non intelligor illis. Ovid. Preliminary notice. What is celebrity? Here is the unfortunate work to which I owe my own. It is certain that this piece, which won me a prize and made my name, is mediocre at best, and I venture to add that it is one of the least in the whole collection. What an abyss of miseries the author would have avoided if this first book had been received only according to its merits! But an initially unjustified favor gradually brought me severe treatment, which is even more undeserved. Preface. Here is one of the greatest and most beautiful questions ever raised. In this discourse, it is not a question of those metaphysical subtleties which have triumphed over all parts of literature, and from which programs in an academy are not always exempt. However, it does concern one of those truths upon which rests the happiness of the human race. I anticipate that people will have difficulty forgiving me for the position which I have dared to take. By colliding head-on with everything which wins men's admiration nowadays, I can expect only universal censure. And I cannot count on public approval just because I have been honored with the approbation of some wise men. But still, I have taken on position. I am not worried about pleasing clever minds or fashionable people. In every period there will be men fated to be governed by the opinions of their century, their country, and their society. For that very reason, a freethinker or philosopher today would have been nothing but a fanatic at the time of the League. One must not write for such readers if one wishes to live beyond one's own age. One more word and I'll be finished. Little expecting the honor I received since I submitted this discourse, I have reorganized and expanded it to the point of making it, in one way or another, a different work. Today I believe I am obliged to restore it to the state it was in when it was awarded the prize. I have only thrown in some notes and left two readily recognizable additions, of which the Academy perhaps might not have approved. I thought that equity, respect, and gratitude demanded that I provide this notice. Discourse. Decimer specie recti. Has the restoration of the sciences and the arts contributed to the purification or to the corruption of morality? This is the matter we have to examine. What side should I take on this question? That, gentlemen, which suits an honorable man who knows nothing and who does not, for that reason, think any less of himself. It will be difficult, I sense, to adapt what I have to say for the tribunal before which I am appearing. How can one venture to blame the sciences in front of one of the most scholarly societies in Europe, praise ignorance in a famous academy, and reconcile a contempt for study with respect for truly learned men? I have seen these contradictions, and they have not discouraged me. I am not mistreating science, I told myself. I am defending virtue in front of virtuous men. Integrity is cherished among good people, even more than erudition is among scholars. So what am I afraid of? The enlightened minds of the assembly which is listening to me? I confess that is a fear. But it's a fear about the construction of the discourse and not about the feelings of the speaker. Equitable sovereigns have never hesitated to condemn themselves in doubtful arguments, and the most advantageous position in a just cause is to have to defend oneself against a well-informed party who is judging his own case with integrity. To this motive, which encourages me, is added another which made up my mind. After I have upheld, according to my natural intelligence, the side of truth, no matter what success I have, there is a prize which I cannot fail to win. I will find it in the depths of my heart. First part. It is a great and beautiful spectacle to see a man somehow emerging from oblivion by his own efforts, dispelling with the light of reason the shadows in which nature had enveloped him, rising above himself, soaring in his mind right up to the celestial regions, moving like the sun with giant strides through the vast extent of the universe, and, what is even greater and more difficult, returning to himself in order to study man there and learn of his nature, his obligations, and his end. All of these marvelous things have been renewed in the past generations. Europe had fallen back into the barbarity of the first ages. People from this part of the world, so enlightened today, lived a few centuries ago in a state worse than ignorance. Some sort of learned jargon, much more despicable than ignorance, had usurped the name of knowledge, and set up an almost invincible obstacle in the way of its return. A revolution was necessary to bring men back to common sense, and it finally came from a quarter where one would least expect it. It was the stupid Muslim, the eternal blight on learning, who brought about its rebirth among us. The collapse of the throne of Constantine carried into Italy the debris of ancient Greece. France, in turn, was enriched by these precious remnants. The sciences soon followed letters. To the art of writing was joined the art of learning, a sequence which may seem strange, but which is perhaps only too natural. And people began to feel the main advantage of busying themselves with the muses, which is to make men more sociable by inspiring in them the desire to please each other with works worthy of their mutual approbation. The mind has its needs, just as the body does. The latter are the foundations of society. From the former emerge the pleasures of society. While government and laws take care of the security and the well-being of men and groups, the sciences, letters, and the arts, less despotic and perhaps more powerful, spread garlands of flowers over the iron chains which weigh men down, snuffing out in them the feeling of that original liberty for which they appear to have been born, and make them love their slavery by turning them into what are called civilized people. Need has raised thrones, the sciences and the arts have strengthened them. You earthly powers, cherish talents and protect those who nurture them. Civilized people, cultivate them, happy slaves. To them you owe that refined and delicate taste you take pride in, that softness of character, and that urbanity of habits which make dealings among you so sociable and easy, in a word, the appearance of all the virtues without the possession of any. By this type of politeness, all the more amiable for being less pretentious, in previous times, Athens and Rome distinguished itself in the days when they received so much praise for their magnificence and splendor. In that civility, our age and our nation will, no doubt, surpass all ages and people. A philosophical tone without pedantry, natural yet considerate manners, equally remote from Teutonic boorishness and Italian pantomime. There you have the fruits of a taste acquired by good education and perfected by social interaction. How sweet it would be to live amongst us if the exterior appearance was always an image of the heart's tendencies, if decency was a virtue, if our maxims served us as rules, if true philosophy was inseparable from the title of philosopher. But so many qualities too rarely go together, and virtue hardly ever walks in so much pomp. Richness in dress can announce a man with money, and elegance a man with taste. The healthy, robust man is recognized by other signs. It is under the rustic clothing of a laborer, and not under the gilded frame of a courtesan, that one finds physical strength and energy. Finery is no less a stranger to virtue, which is the power and vigor of the soul. The good man is an athlete who delights in fighting naked. He despises all those vile ornaments which hamper the use of his strength, the majority of which were invented only to conceal some deformity. Before art fashioned our manners and taught our passions to speak an affected language, our habits were rustic but natural, and differences in behavior announced at first glance differences in character. Human nature was not fundamentally better, but men found their security in the ease with which they could see through each other, and this advantage, whose value we no longer feel, spared them many vices. Nowadays, when more subtle studies and more refined taste have reduced the art of pleasing into principles, a vile and misleading uniformity governs our customs, and all minds seem to have been cast in the same mold. Incessantly, politeness makes demands, propriety issues orders, and incessantly people follow customary usage, never their own inclinations. One does not dare to appear as what one is. And in this perpetual constraint, men who make up this herd we call society, placed in the same circumstances, will all do the same things, unless more powerful motives prevent them. Thus, one will never know well the person he is dealing with. For to get to know one's friend, it will be necessary to wait for critical occasions, that is to say, to wait until it's too late, because it is to deal with these very emergencies that one needed to know him in the first place. What a parade of vices will accompany this uncertainty! No more sincere friendships, no more real esteem, no more well-founded trust. Suspicions, offenses, fears, coldness, reserve, hatred, and betrayal will always be hiding under this uniform and perfidious veil of politeness, under that urbanity which is so praised, and which we owe to our centuries' enlightenment. We will no longer profane the name of the Master of the Universe by swearing, but we will insult it with blasphemies, and our scrupulous ears will not be offended. People will not boast of their own merit, but they will demean that of others. No man will grossly abuse his enemy, but he will slander him with skill. National hatreds will expand, but that will be for love of one's country. In place of contemptible ignorance, we will substitute a dangerous pyrrhonism. There will be some forbidden excesses, dishonorable vices, but others will be decorated with the name of virtues. It will be necessary to have them or to affect them. Let anyone who wishes boast about the wise men of our time. As for me, I see nothing there but a refinement of intemperance every bit as unworthy of my praise as their artificial simplicity. Such is the purity our morality has acquired. In this way we have become respectable people. It is up to literature, the sciences, and the arts to claim responsibility for their share in this salutary work. I will add merely one reflection, as follows. An inhabitant in some distant country who wished to form some idea of European morals based on the condition of the sciences among us, on the perfection of our arts, on the propriety of our entertainments, on the politeness of our manners, on the affability of our discussions, on our perpetual demonstrations of goodwill, and on that turbulent competition among men of all ages and all conditions who appear to be fussing from dawn to sunset about helping one another, then this stranger, I say, would conclude that our morals are exactly the opposite of what they are. Where there is no effect, there is no cause to look for. But here the effect is certain, the depravity real, and our souls will become corrupted to the extent that our sciences and our arts have advanced toward perfection. Will someone say that this is a misfortune peculiar to our age? No, gentlemen. The evils brought about by our vain curiosity are as old as the world. The daily ebb and flow of the ocean's waters have not been more regularly subjected to the orbit of the star which gives us light during the night than the fate of morals and respectability has been to progress in the sciences and arts. We have seen virtue fly away to the extent that their lights have risen over our horizon, and the same phenomenon can be observed at all times and in all places. Look at Egypt, the first school of the universe, that climate so fertile under a bronze sky, that celebrated country which Sesostris left long ago to conquer the world. It became the mother of philosophy and fine arts, and soon afterwards was conquered by Cambyses, then the Greeks, Romans, Arabs, and finally the Turks. Look at Greece, once populated with heroes who twice vanquished Asia, once before Troy and then again in their own homeland. The early growth of literature had not yet carried corruption into the hearts of its inhabitants, but progress in the arts, the dissolution of morality, and the Macedonian yoke followed closely on one another's heels. And Greece, always knowledgeable, always voluptuous, always enslaved, achieved nothing in its revolutions except changes in its masters. All the eloquence of Demosthenes could never reanimate a body which luxury and the arts had enervated. It was at the time of Ennius and Terence that Rome, founded by a shepherd and made famous by farmers, began to degenerate. But after Ovid, Catullus, Martial, and that crowd of obscene authors, whose very names alarm one's sense of decency, Rome, formerly the temple of virtue, became the theater of crime, the disgrace of nations, and the toy of barbarians. This capital of the world eventually fell under the yoke which it had imposed on so many people, and the day of its fall was the day before one of its citizens was given the title of arbiter of good taste. What shall I say about the great city of the Eastern Empire, which by its position seemed destined to be the capital of the whole world, that sanctuary for the sciences and arts forbidden in the rest of Europe, perhaps more through wisdom than barbarity? Everything that is most disgraceful in debauchery and corruption, treasons, assassinations, the blackest poisons, and even more atrocious, the combination of all these crimes, that's what makes up the fabric of the history of Constantinople. That's the pure source from which we were sent, that enlightenment for which our age glorifies itself. But why seek in such distant times for proofs of a truth for which we have existing evidence right before our eyes? There is in Asia an immense country where literary honors lead to the highest offices of state. If the sciences purified morals, if they taught men to shed their own blood for their country, if they inspired courage, the people of China would become wise, free, and invincible. But if there is no vice which does not rule over them, no crime unfamiliar to them, if neither the enlightenment of ministers, nor the alleged wisdom in the laws, nor the multitude of inhabitants of that vast empire was capable of keeping it safe from the ignorant and coarse yoke of the Tartars, what use have all these wise men been to them? What fruits has it reaped from all the honors lavished on them? Could it perhaps be the reward of being an enslaved and wicked people? Let us contrast these pictures with those of the morals of a small number of people who, protected from this contagion of vain knowledge, have by their virtues created their own happiness and become an example to other nations. Such were the first Persians, a remarkable nation in which people learned virtue the way people learn science among us, which conquered Asia so easily, and which was the only one to acquire the glory of having the history of its institutions taken for a philosophical novel. Such were the Scythians, to whom we have been left such magnificent tributes. Such were the Germans, in whom a writer who had grown weary of tracing the crimes and baseness of an educated, opulent, and voluptuous people, found relief by describing their simplicity, innocence, and virtues. Rome had been like that, especially in the time of its poverty and ignorance. And finally, up to the present day, that rustic nation has shown itself to be like this, so lauded for its courage, which adversity has not been able to defeat, and for its fidelity, which bad examples could not corrupt. It was not through stupidity that the latter had preferred other exercises to those of the mind. They were not ignorant of the fact that in other lands idle men spent their lives disputing their sovereign good, vice, and virtue, and that proud reasoners, while giving themselves the greatest praise, shoved all other people together under the contemptuous name of barbarians. But they looked at their morals and learned to despise their learning. Could I forget that it was the very heart of Greece that saw the emergence of that city, as famous for its happy ignorance as for the wisdom of its laws, whose virtues seemed so much greater than those of men, that it was a republic of demigods rather than of men? O Sparta, how you eternally shame a vain doctrine! While the vices led along by the fine arts were introduced together with them in Athens, while a tyrant there collected with so much care the works of the prince of poets, you were chasing the arts, artists, and sciences, and learned men from their walks. That event was an indication of this difference. Athens became the abode of politeness and good taste, the land of orators and philosophers. The elegance of the buildings there corresponded to that of its language. In every quarter there, one could see marble and canvas brought to life by the hands of the most accomplished masters. From Athens came those amazing works which would serve as a model in all corrupt ages. The picture of Lacedaemon is less brilliant. In that place, other people used to say, the men are born virtuous, and even the air of the country seems to inspire virtue. Nothing is left for us of its inhabitants except the memory of their heroic actions. Should monuments like that be less valuable for us than those remarkable marbles which Athens has left us? It is true that some wise men resisted the general torrent and avoided vices while living with the Muses. But one needs to hear the judgment which the most important and most unfortunate among them delivered on the learned men and artists of his time. I examine the poets, he says, and I look on them as people whose talent overawes both themselves and others, people who present themselves as wise men and are taken as such, when they are nothing of the sort. From poets, Socrates continues, I move to artists. No one was more ignorant about the arts than I. No one was more convinced that artists possessed really beautiful secrets. However, I noticed that their condition was no better than that of the poets, and that both of them have the same misconceptions. Because the most skillful among them excel in their speciality, they look upon themselves as the wisest of men. In my eyes, this presumption completely tarnished their knowledge. As a result, putting myself in the place of the oracle, and asking myself what I would prefer to be, what I was or what they were, to know what they learned or to know that I know nothing, I replied to myself and to the God, I wish to remain who I am. We do not know, neither the sophists, nor the orators, nor the artists, nor I, what the true, the good, and the beautiful are. But there is this difference between us. Although these people know nothing, they all believe they know something, whereas I, if I know nothing, at least have no doubts about it. As a result, all this superiority in wisdom, which the oracle has attributed to me, reduces itself to the single point that I am strongly convinced that I am ignorant of what I do not know. So there you have the wisest of men in the judgment of the gods, and most knowledgeable Athenian in the opinion of all of Greece, Socrates, singing the praises of ignorance. Do we believe that if he came to live among us, our learned men and our artists would make him change his opinion? No, gentlemen. This just man would continue to despise our vain sciences. He would not help to augment that pile of books with which we are swamped from all directions. And he would leave after him, as he once did, nothing by way of a moral precept for his disciples and our posterity, other than his example and memory of his virtue. It is beautiful to teach men in this way. Socrates had started in Athens. In Rome, Cato the Elder continued to rage against those artificial and subtle Greeks who were seducing virtue and weakened the courage of his fellow citizens. But the sciences, arts, and dialectic prevailed once more. Rome was filled with philosophers and orators, military discipline was neglected, and agriculture despised. People embraced factions and forgot about their fatherland. The sacred names of liberty, disinterestedness, and obedience to the laws gave way to the names Epicurus, Zeno, and Arcellus. Since the learned men began to appear among us, their own philosophers used to say, good people have slipped away. Up to that time, Romans had been content to practice virtue. Everything was lost when they began to study it. O Fabricius, what would your great soul have thought if to your own misfortune you had been called back to life, and had seen the pompous face of this Rome saved by your efforts, and which your honorable name had distinguished more than all of its conquests? Gods, you would have said, what has happened to those thatched roofs, and those rustic dwelling places where, back then, moderation and virtue lived? What fatal splendor has succeeded Roman simplicity? What is this strange language? What are those effeminate customs? What do these statues signify? These paintings, these buildings? You mad people, what have you done? You masters of nations, have you turned yourself into slaves for the frivolous men you conquered? Are you now governed by rhetoricians? Was it to enrich architects, painters, sculptors, and comic actors that you soaked Greece and Asia with your blood? Are the spoils of Carthage trophies for a flute player? Romans, hurry up and tear down these amphitheaters, break up these marbles, burn these paintings, chase out these slaves who are subjugating you, whose fatal arts are corrupting you. Let other hands distinguish themselves with vain talents. The only talent worthy of Rome is that of conquering the world and making virtue reign there. When Cineas took our Senate for an assembly of kings, he was not dazzled by vain pomp or affected by elegance. He did not hear this frivolous eloquence, the study and charm of futile men. What then did Cineas see that was so majestic? O citizens, he saw a spectacle which your riches or your arts could never produce, the most beautiful sight which has ever appeared under heaven, an assembly of 200 virtuous men, worthy of commanding in Rome and governing the earth. But let us move across time and distance between places and see what has happened in our countries, before our own eyes, or rather, let us set aside the hateful pictures which would wound our sensitivity, and spare ourselves the trouble of repeating the same things under other names. It was not in vain that I called upon the shade of Fabricius. And what did I make that great man say that I could not have put into the mouth of Louis XII or Henry IV? Among us, to be sure, Socrates would not have drunk hemlock, but he would have drunk in an even bitterer cup, insulting mockery and contempt 100 times worse than death. There you see how luxury, dissolution, and slavery have in every age been the punishment for the arrogant efforts we have made in order to emerge from the happy ignorance where eternal wisdom had placed us. The thick veil with which she had covered all her operations seemed to provide a sufficient warning to us that we were not destined for vain researches. But have we known how to profit from any of her lessons? Have we neglected any with impunity? Peoples, Know once and for all that nature wished to protect you from knowledge, just as a mother snatches away a dangerous weapon from the hands of her child. That all the secrets which she keeps hidden from you are so many evils she is defending you against, and that the difficulty you experience in educating yourselves is not the least of her benefits. Men are perverse. It would be even worse if they had the misfortune of being born knowledgeable. How humiliating these reflections are for humanity. How our pride must be mortified. What? Could integrity be the daughter of ignorance? Could knowledge and virtue be incompatible? What consequences could we not draw from these opinions? But to reconcile these apparent contradictions, it is necessary only to examine closely the vanity and the emptiness of those proud titles which dazzle us and which we hand out so gratuitously to human learning. Let us therefore consider the sciences and the arts in themselves. Let us see what must be the result of their progress. And let us no longer hesitate to concur on all points where our reasoning finds itself in agreement with conclusions drawn from history. Second part. It was an old tradition, passed on from Egypt into Greece, that a god hostile to men's peace and quiet was the inventor of the sciences. What opinion, then, must the Egyptians themselves have had about the sciences, which were born among them? They could keep a close eye on the sources which produced them. In fact, whether we leaf through the annals of the world, or supplement uncertain chronicles with philosophical research, we will not find an origin for human learning which corresponds to the idea we like to create for it. Astronomy was born from superstition, eloquence from ambition, hate, flattery, and lies, geometry from avarice, physics from a vain curiosity, everything, even morality itself, from human pride. The sciences and the arts thus owe their birth to their vices. We would have fewer doubts about their advantages if they owed their birth to our virtues. The flaw in their origin is only too evidently redrawn for us in their objects. What would we do with the arts without the luxury which nourishes them? Without human injustice, what is the use of jurisprudence? What would become of history if there were neither tyrants, nor wars, nor conspirators? In a word, who would want to spend his life in such sterile contemplation? If each man consulted only his human duties and natural needs, and had time only for his country, for the unfortunate, and for his friends, are we thus fated to die tied down on the edge of the pits where truth has gone into hiding? This single reflection should discourage, right from the outset, every man who would seriously seek to instruct himself through the study of philosophy. What dangers lurk? What false routes in an investigation of the sciences? How many errors, 1,000 times more dangerous than the truth, is useful? Does one not have to get past to reach the truth? The disadvantage is clear. For what is false is susceptible to an affinity of combinations, but truth has only one form of being. Besides, who is seeking it in full sincerity? Even with the greatest goodwill, by what marks does one recognize it for certain? In this crowd of different feelings, what will be our criterion to judge it properly? And the most difficult point of all, if by luck we do end up finding the truth, who among us will know how to make good use of it? If our sciences are vain in the objects they set for themselves, they are even more dangerous in the effects they produce. Born in idleness, they nourish it in their turn. And the irreparable loss of time is the first damage they necessarily inflict on society. In politics, as in morality, it is a great evil not to do good, and we could perhaps look on every useless citizen as a pernicious man. So answer me, illustrious philosophers, those of you thanks to whom we know in what proportions bodies attract each other in a vacuum, What are, in the planetary orbits, the ratios of the areas gone through in equal times? What curves have conjugate points, points of inflection and cusps? How man sees everything in God, how the soul and the body work together without communication, just as two clocks do? What stars could be inhabited? Which insects reproduce in an extraordinary way? Answer me, I say, you from whom we have received so much sublime knowledge. If you had never taught us anything about these things, would we have been less numerous, less well governed, less formidable, less striving, or more perverse? So go back over the importance of what you have produced. And if the work of our most enlightened scholars and of our best citizens brings us so little of any use, tell us what we should think of that crowd of obscure writers and idle men of letters who are uselessly eating up the substance of the state. Did I say idle? Would to God they really were. Our morality would be healthier and society more peaceful. But these vain and futile declaimers move around in all directions, armed with their fatal paradoxes, undermining the foundations of faith and annihilating virtue. They smile with disdain at these old words, fatherland and religion, and dedicate their talents and their philosophy to the destruction and degradation of everything which is sacred among men. Not that they basically hate either virtue or our dogmas. It's public opinion they are opposed to, and to bring them back to the foot of the altar, all one would have to do is make them live amongst atheists. Oh, this rage to make oneself stand out. What are you not capable of? To misuse one's time is a great evil. But other, even more worse evils come from the arts and letters. Luxury is such an evil, born, like them, from the idleness and vanity of men. Luxury rarely comes along without the arts and sciences, and they never develop without it. I know that our philosophy, always fertile in remarkable maxims, maintains, contrary to the experience of all the ages, that luxury creates the splendor of states, but, forgetting about the need for supplementary laws, will philosophy still dare to deny that good customs are essential to the duration of empires, and that luxury is diametrically opposed to good customs? True, luxury may be a sign of riches, and it even serves, if you like, to multiply them. What will we necessarily conclude from this paradox so worthy of arising in our day? And what will virtue become when people must enrich themselves at any price? Ancient politicians talked incessantly about morality and virtue. Our politicians talk only about business and money. One will tell you that in a particular country a man is worth the sum he could be sold for in Algiers. Another, by following this calculation, will find countries where a man is worth nothing, and others where he is worth less than nothing. They assess men like herds of livestock. According to them, a man has no value to the state apart from what he consumes in it. Thus, when Sybarite would have been worth at least 30 Spartans, would someone therefore hazard a guess which of these two republics, Sparta or Sybaris, was overthrown by a handful of peasants, and which one made Asia tremble? The kingdom of Cyrus was conquered with 30,000 men by a prince poorer than the least of the Persian satraps, and the Scythians, the most miserable of all people, managed to resist the most powerful kings of the universe. Two famous republics were fighting for imperial control of the world. One was very rich, and the other had nothing, and the latter destroyed the former. The Roman Empire, in its turn, after gulping down all the riches in the universe, became the prey of a people who did not even know what wealth was. The Franks conquered the Gauls, and the Saxons conquered England, without any treasures other than their bravery and their poverty. A bunch of poor mountain dwellers whose greed limited itself entirely to a few sheepskins, after crushing Austrian pride, wiped out that opulent and formidable House of Burgundy, which had been the potentates of Europe's shake. Finally, all the power and all the wisdom of Charles V's heir, supported by all the treasures of the Indies, ended up being shattered by a handful of herring fishermen. Let our politicians deign to suspend their calculations in order to reflect upon these examples, and let them learn for once that with money one has everything except morals and citizens. What, then, is precisely the issue in this question of luxury? To know which of the following is more important to empires, to be brilliant and momentary, or virtuous and lasting. I say brilliant, but with what luster? A taste for ostentation is rarely associated in the same souls with a taste for honesty. No, it is not possible that minds degraded by a multitude of futile concerns would ever raise themselves to anything great. Even when they had the strength for that, the courage would be missing. Every artist wishes to be applauded. The praises of his contemporaries are the most precious part of his reward. What will he do to obtain that praise if he has the misfortune of being born among a people and in a time where learned men have come into fashion and have seen it, that their frivolous young people set the tone, where men have sacrificed their taste to those who tyrannize over their liberty, where one of the sexes dares to approve only what corresponds to the pusillanimity of the other people, let masterpieces of dramatic poetry fall by the wayside, and are repelled by works of wonderful harmony. What will the artist do, gentlemen? He will lower his genius to the level of his age, and will prefer to create commonplace works, which people will admire during his life, than marvelous ones which will not be admired until long after his death. Tell us, famous Arrowet, how many strong and manly beauties you have sacrificed to our false delicacy, and how many great things the spirit of gallantry, so fertile in small things, has cost you. In this way, the dissolution of morals, a necessary consequence of luxury, brings with it, in its turn, the corruption of taste. If by chance among men of extraordinary talents one finds one who has a firm soul and refuses to lend himself to the spirit of his age, and demean himself with puerile works, too bad for him. He will die in poverty and oblivion. I wish I were making a prediction here and not describing experience. Karl and Pierre, the moment has come when that paintbrush destined to augment the majesty of our temples with sublime and holy images will fall from your hands, or will be prostituted to decorate carriage panels with decadent paintings. And you, rival of Praxiteles and Phidias, you whose chisel the ancients would have used to create for them gods capable of excusing their idolatry in our eyes, inimitable Pagale, your hand will be resigned to refinishing the belly of an ape, or it will have to remain idle. One cannot reflect on morals without deriving pleasure from recalling the picture of the simplicity of the first ages. It is a lovely shore, adorned only by the hands of nature, toward which one is always turning one's eye, and from which one feels, with regret, oneself growing more distant, when innocent and virtuous men like to have gods as witnesses of their actions. They lived with them in the same huts, but having soon become evil, they grew wary of these inconvenient spectators, and relegated them to magnificent temples. Finally, they chased the gods out of those, so they could set themselves up in the temples, or at least the gods' temples were no longer distinguished from the citizens' houses. This was when the height of depravity and the vices were never pushed further than when one saw them, so to speak, propped up on marble columns and carved into Corinthian capitals in the entranceways of great men's palaces. When the commodities of life multiply, while the arts perfect themselves, and while luxury spreads, true courage grows enervated. and military virtues vanish. Once again the work of the sciences, and all those arts which are practiced in the shadows of the study. When the Goths ravaged Greece, all the libraries were rescued from the flames only by the opinion spread by one of them that they should let their enemies have property so suitable for turning them away from military exercise, and for keeping them amused with sedentary and idle occupations. Charles VIII saw himself master of Tuscany, and of the kingdom of Naples, without hardly drawing his sword. And all his court attributed the unhoped-for ease of this to the fact that the princes and the nobility of Italy enjoyed making themselves clever and learned more than they did training to become vigorous and warlike. In fact, says the sensible man who describes these two characteristics, every example teaches us that in military policy, and all things similar to it, the study of the sciences is far more suitable for softening and emasculating courage than for strengthening and animating it. The Romans maintained that military virtue was extinguished among them to the extent that they began to know all about paintings, engravings, and vases worked in gold and silver, and to cultivate the fine arts. And, as if this famous country was destined to serve constantly as an example for other people, the rise of the Medici and the re-establishment of letters led once again, and perhaps for all time, to the fall of that warrior reputation which Italy seemed to have regained a few centuries ago. The ancient republics of Greece, with that wisdom which shone out from most of their institutions, prohibited their citizens all tranquil and sedentary occupations, which, by weakening and corrupting the body, quickly enervate vigor in the soul. In fact, how can men whom the smallest need overwhelms and the least trouble repels look on hunger, thirst, exhaustion, dangers, and death? With what courage will soldiers endure excessive work with which they are quite unfamiliar? With what enthusiasm will they make forced marches under the officers who do not have the strength to make the journey even on horseback? And let no one offer objections concerning the celebrated valor of these modern warriors who are so disciplined in their learning. People boast highly to me of their bravery on a day of battle, but no one understands anything about how they bear an excess of work, how they resist the harshness of the seasons and bad weather. It requires only a little sun or snow, only the lack of a few superfluities, to melt down and destroy in a few days the best of our armies. Intrepid warriors, for once accept the truth which you so rarely hear. You are brave, I know that. You would have triumphed with Hannibal at Cannae and at Trasimene. With you, Caesar would have crossed the Rubicon and enslaved his people. But with you, the former would not have crossed the Alps, and the latter would not have conquered your ancestors. Combat does not always produce success in war, and for generals there is an art superior to the art of winning battles. A man can run fearlessly into the firing line. Nonetheless, he can be a very bad officer. Even in a soldier, perhaps a little more strength and energy could be more essential than so much courage, which does not protect him from death. And what does it matter to the state whether its troops die of fever and cold, or by the enemy's sword? If cultivating the sciences is detrimental to warrior qualities, it is even more so to moral qualities. From our very first years, our inane education decorates our minds and corrupts our judgment. I see all over the place immense establishments where young people are raised at great expense to learn everything except their obligations. Your children will know nothing of their own language, but they will speak in others which are nowhere in use. They will know how to compare verses which they will hardly be capable of understanding. Without knowing how to distinguish truth and error, they will possess the art of making both truth and error unrecognizable to others through arguments. But they will not know what the words magnanimity, temperance, humanity, and courage mean. That sweet name of fatherland will never strike their ears, and if they hear talk of God, that will be less to be in awe of him than to fear him. I would be just as happy, a wise man said, for my people to spend his time playing tennis. At least that would make his body more fit. I know that it is necessary to keep children busy, and that idleness is for them the danger one should fear most. What then is necessary for them to learn? Now, that's surely a good question. Let them learn what they ought to do as men, and not something they ought to forget. Our gardens are decorated with statues, and our galleries with paintings. What do they think these artistic masterpieces on show for public admiration represent? The defenders of our country? Or those even greater men who have enriched it with their virtues? No! They are images of all the errors of the heart and mind, carefully derived from ancient mythology, and presented to our children's curiosity at a young age. No doubt that they may have right before their eyes models of bad actions, even before they know how to read. From where do all these abuses arise, if it is not the fatal inequality introduced among men by distinctions among their talents and by the degradation of their virtues? There you have the most obvious effect of all our studies, and the most dangerous of all their consequences. We no longer ask if a man has integrity, but if he has talent, nor whether a book is useful, but if it is well written. The rewards for a witty man are enormous, while virtue remains without honor. There are 1,000 prizes for fine discourses, none for fine actions. Let someone tell me, none the less, if the glory attached to the best of the discourses, which will be crowned in this academy, is comparable to the merit of having founded the prize. The wise man does not run after fortune, but he is not insensitive to glory. And when he sees it so badly disturbed, his virtue, which a little praise would have energized and made advantageous to society, collapses, grows sluggish, and dies away in misery and oblivion. That's what, in the long run, must be the result of a preference for agreeable talents rather than useful ones, and that's what experience has only too often confirmed since the re-establishment of the sciences and the arts. We have physicians, mathematicians, chemists, astronomers, poets, musicians, painters, but we no longer have citizens. Or if we still have some scattered in our abandoned countryside, they are dying there in poverty and disgrace. Such is the condition to which those who give us bread and who provide milk for our children are reduced. And those are the feelings we have for them. However, I admit that the evil is not as great as it could have been. Eternal foresight, by placing beside various harmful plants some healthy medicinal herbs, and setting inside the body of several harmful animals the remedy for their wounds, has taught sovereigns, who are its ministers, to imitate its wisdom. Through this example, the great monarch, whose glory will only acquire new brilliance from age to age, has drawn from the very bosom of the sciences and arts sources of 1,000 disturbances, those famous societies charged with the dangerous storage of human knowledge, and, at the same time, with the sacred preservation of morals. Through the care they take to maintain the total purity of their trust among themselves, and to demand such purity from the members they admit. These wise institutions, reinforced by his august successor, and imitated by all the kings in Europe, will serve at least as a restraint on men of letters, who all aspire to the honor of being admitted into the academies, and will thus watch over themselves, and will try to make themselves worthy of that which is useful works and irreproachable morals. Of these companies, those who offer in their competitions for prizes which they honor literary merit, a choice of subjects appropriate to reanimating the love of virtue in citizens' hearts, will demonstrate that this love reigns among them, and will give people such a rare and sweet pleasure of seeing the learned societies dedicating themselves to pouring out for the human race not merely agreeable enlightenment, but also beneficial learning. Let no one therefore make an objection which is for me only a new proof. So many precautions reveal only too clearly how necessary it is to take them. People do not seek remedies for evils which do not exist. Why must these ones, because of their inadequacy, still have the character of ordinary remedies? So many institutions created for the benefit of the learned are only all the more capable of impressing people with the objects of the sciences, and of directing minds towards their cultivation. It seems, to judge from the precautions people take, that we have too many farm laborers, and are afraid of not having enough philosophers. I do not wish here to hazard a comparison between agriculture and philosophy. People would not put up with that. I will simply ask, what is philosophy? What do the writings of the best-known philosophers contain? What are the lessons of these friends of wisdom? To listen to them, would one not take them for a troop of charlatans crying out in a public square, each from his own corner, "Come to me! I'm the only one who is not wrong." One of them maintains that there are no bodies, and that everything is appearance. Another, that there is no substance except matter, no God other than the world. This one here proposes that there are no virtues or vices, and that moral good and moral evil are chimeras. That one there, that men are wolves and can devour each other with a clear conscience. Oh, great philosophers, why not reserve these profitable lessons for your friends and your children? You will soon earn your reward, and we would have no fear of finding any of your followers among your own people. There you have the marvelous men on whom the esteem of their contemporaries was lavish during their lives, and for whom immortality was reserved after their passing away. Such are the wise maxims which we have received from them, and which we will pass down to our descendants from age to age. Has paganism, though abandoned to all the caprices of human reason, left posterity anything which could compare to the shameful monuments which printing has prepared for it under the reign of the gospel? The profane writings of Leucippus and Diagoras perished with them. People had not yet invented the art of immortalizing the extravagances of the human mind, but thanks to typographic characters and the way we use them, the dangerous reveries of Hobbes and Spinoza will remain forever. Go, you celebrated writings, which the ignorant and rustic nature of our fathers would not have been incapable of. Go down to our descendants with those even more dangerous writings which exude the corruption of morals in our century, and together carry into the centuries to come a faithful history of the progress and the advantages of our sciences and our arts. If they read you, you will not leave them in any perplexity about the question we are dealing with today. And unless they are more foolish than we are, they will lift their hands to heaven, and will say in the bitterness of their hearts, "Almighty God, you who hold the minds of men in your hands, deliver us from the enlightenment and the fatal arts of our fathers, and give us back ignorance, innocence, and poverty, the only goods which can make our happiness, and which are precious in your sight." But if the progress of the sciences and the arts has added nothing to our true happiness, if it has corrupted our morality, and if the moral corruption has damaged purity of taste, what will we think of that crowd of simple writers who have removed from the temple of the Muses the difficulties which safeguarded access to it, and which nature had set up there as a test of strength for those who would be tempted to learn? What will we think of those compilers of works who had indiscriminately beaten down the doors to the sciences and introduced into their sanctuary a population unworthy of approaching them, whereas one would hope that all those who could not advance far in a scholarly career would be turned back at the entrance way and thrown into arts useful to society. A man who all his life will be a bad versifier or a minor geometer could perhaps have become a great manufacturer of tiles. Those whom nature destined to make her disciples have no need for teachers. Bacon, Descartes, Newton, these tutors of the human race had no need for tutors themselves, and what guides could have led them to those places where their vast genius carried them? Ordinary teachers could only have limited their understanding by confining it to their own narrow capabilities. With the first obstacles, they learned to exert themselves and made the effort to traverse the immense space they moved through. If it is necessary to permit some men to devote themselves to the study of the sciences and the arts, that should be only for those who feel in themselves the power to walk alone in those men's footsteps and to move beyond them. It is the task of this small number of people to raise monuments to the glory of the human mind. But if we wish nothing to lie outside their genius, then nothing must lie beyond their hopes. That's the only encouragement they require. The soul adapts itself insensibly to the objects which concern it, and it is great events which make great men. The Prince of Eloquence was Consul of Rome, and perhaps the greatest of philosophers was Chancellor of England. Can one believe that if one of them had occupied only a chair in some university, and the other had obtained only a modest pension from an academy? Can one believe, I say, that their works would not have been affected by their positions? So let kings not disdain to admit into their councils the people who are most capable of giving good advice. And may they give up the old prejudice invented by the pride of the great, that the art of leading peoples is more difficult than the art of enlightening them, as if it were easier to induce men to do good voluntarily than to compel them to do it by force. May learned men of the first rank find honorable sanctuary in their courts. May they obtain there the only reward worthy of them, contributing through their influence to the happiness of those people to whom they have taught wisdom. Then, and only then, will we see what can be achieved by virtue, science, and authority, energized by a noble emulation and working cooperatively for the happiness of the human race. But so long as power remains by itself on one side, and the enlightenment and wisdom isolated on the other, wise men will rarely think of great things, princes will more rarely carry out fine actions, and the people will continue to be vile, corrupt, and unhappy. As for us common men, to whom heaven has not allotted such great talents, and destined for so much glory, let us remain in our obscurity. Let us not run after a reputation which would elude us, and which, in the present state of things, would never give back to us what it would cost, even if we had all the qualifications to obtain it. What good is it looking for our happiness in the opinion of others, if we can find it in ourselves? Let us leave to others the care of instructing people about their duties, and limit ourselves to carrying out our own well. We do not need to know any more than this. O virtue, sublime science of simple souls, are so many troubles and trappings necessary for one to know you? Are your principles not engraved in all hearts? And in order to learn your laws, is it not enough to go back into oneself and listen to the voice of one's conscience in the silence of the passions? There you have true philosophy. Let us learn to be satisfied with that, and without envying the glory of those famous men who are immortalized in the Republic of Letters, let us try to set between them and us that glorious distinction which people made long ago between two great peoples. One knew how to speak well, the other to act well.